Hi, my name's Dave Flynn, and thanks for watching my bass collection and part 2 of my look at the GR77 Bass Synth and controller. And in this part 2, we're looking particularly at the G77 controller in more detail. Now, in part 1, I just gave you a bit of an overview of the synth and how it sort of fitted in. In part 2, we're just going to take a really sort of a closer look at the controller itself, because while, as I said in part 1, the GR77 had a lot of issues. Well, the 700 series itself had a lot of glitches. Part of it also comes from this this very unique controller design as well. It had some of its own problems as well. Now, the controller itself was built by Ibanez at the time, and as you get a closer look at it, you'll see that it's pretty much typical Ibanez hardware of that period of time, and we're talking around the mid 80s. So it is very typical of Ibanez in that way. But the construction of this instrument was made specifically for the GR700 and the G77 series specifically itself. And it is, as I said in part 1, an iconic design, and it still sits out as an iconic design of the 80s. When they look at anything we talk about anything sort of like synthy and electronic from that period of time, you'll always see an image of one of these get resurrected from that period of time, and that probably just shows that the design stands the test of time, although the functionality of the design is something else that could be sort of argued. And particularly, I'll look at the functionality of this as we go along. But just having a look at the bass by itself, well, it's a bolt-on maple neck, 22 frets, rosewood fingerboard. The body is, as far as I gather, is maple as well. There's nothing else that I can kind of see that actually says what the body was actually made out of, particularly, but just looking at it, it looks to me like it's made out of the same material as the neck, so I'm assuming that that is maple, and it's probably in keeping with a lot of instruments of similar design back in that mid 80s, and I'm talking about things like Honor and Riverhead and those kind of instruments all sort of had that maple body and neck. This one also has this this unique, what they call stabilizing bar, which is probably the thing that kind of that kind of stood out for this instrument at the time. And this was both on the guitar and the bass version like this one. Now, a lot of people assume that this bar is some kind of like nifty handle or something like that to carry it around, but it is actually a functional, what they call stabilizing arm. And the whole idea of this arm, which is made of graphite actually, although it feels sort of plastic, but it's very light, but it's actually made of graphite. And the idea of this bar is to prevent the neck from moving and from twisting. And as I sort of mentioned in part one of the issues with, particularly with a string-based synth, is string tracking. And to assure in some respects that the tracking stays true, the stabilizing arm is there to prevent the neck from, particularly from twisting this way more than anything else, and a little bit this way as well, although it does have the truss rod in there to help to do that. But this is to give it extra stability, and that's really what the idea of this stabilizing arm is all about. Nothing else. So if we take a look at the electronics, you can see there, Roland described these as actually humbucking pickups, but if you actually look at them, they look to me like single coil pickups, any single coil pickup that you would see on a J bass. So they just look like a J pickup to me. They don't look particularly humbucking, and certainly in playing they don't sort of sound particularly like that. However, in the manual that comes with the bass, it's actually described as being humbucking pickups. So I'm not 100% sure, and short of pulling them apart to actually have a look, it's hard to determine that. If you've got a bit more information, yeah, please let me know. But just looking at that, it just doesn't seem to marry up with the actual the book that I have that describes it. Having a look further down here, and you can kind of see the tailpiece and the bridge all together. This is the MIDI pickup here by itself. So this is an independent pickup, just for the MIDI itself as well. Now these little bits on the end here are the little are actually the little tremolo switches. So that's what I was kind of touching when you heard a couple of the bits that I was playing there. That's actually the tremolo touchpad there as well. So as you touch it, that will produce tremolo. Take it off, and it stops that. So that's that. Now, if you look at the controls, well, the controls are probably no different to any other bass. If you ignore the bottom line here, or sorry, the top line here, which basically controls the synth itself, and just look at the bottom here, this is actually no different to any other bass. So it has one volume, it has one pickup pan, and one tone. Now the tone is actually a passive tone, so there's no active circuitry in this at all. So to me it's just like an odd-shaped jazz bass. That's the way that I always kind of look at it. This one at the back here is the blend knob between these pickups, so between the actual bass pickup and the MIDI, the synth pickup itself. So that blends the two of those. So if I was to move that knob one way like that, that actually is just a synth by itself, and moving this around will actually blend the synth and the bass together, which is obviously a neat function. Now these knobs up here are basically used, these controls here are used really in the programming of the bass, and they're never in the programming of the synth, and work in conjunction with the floor module. So you don't tend to use these in live play at all. Just these knobs at the bottom. This button here, or this switch here, is called a mode switch. Now this mode switch it has 3 positions, but only really works in 2. So if you push the tone switch to the mode switch to mode 1, it actually is just the bass by itself. So that cuts out the synth. By putting the switch into mode 2, then that is the synth and the bass together, and that works quite well. Mode 3 doesn't do anything at all. So and I've never really understood why it had 3 positions to it, and it may have something to do with other models later on. I'm not 100% sure, but from what I can see is mode 1 and 2 are the functional ones that work on that, and that seems to be for all of them. Yeah, so that gives you a bit of an idea of the controls. So if we look at this purely as a bass, forget the synth for a moment, it's not that great an instrument in terms of its sound. It really is, as I said, just to me, a wacky jazz bass. That's the way that I've kind of see it. And in terms of the sound, well, I don't know, it just sort of lacks something to me. Certainly, I mean, the bass is there. But to me, I don't know, it's just something about it that it just feels like it's lacking something, or it's just the tone is just missing something in it itself. So as a bass by itself, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it from that perspective. If you were looking at it from also just from the design is all wrong as well. And what do I mean by that? Well, just this design, the way it is. Certainly, it's a really space-agey, iconic shape, and certainly you can't take that away from it. And a lot of people look at it and go, "Oh yeah, it's just such a radical design." But for functionality, it doesn't work at all. You can't sit this on your lap, for instance, and balance it. It just doesn't work. I need a strap to play it. To even sit down and play it, and that's what you'd find. You'd probably find it's easier to stand up and play this than it is to sit down. Sit down with it like this, and as soon as I let it go, I can't. It is just total neck heavy. All the weight is sitting up here in this part of the instrument. Nothing down in here. It's all very light, and that makes it one of the difficulties of this instrument to work with. And you'll find, sort of sitting down, that you're always fighting the instrument all the time to try and hold it up, and that's one of the things I don't like about this design, and was one of the criticisms of this bass when it came out. One of the interesting things about this bass is, if you look on the side here, is that you can actually play it as a bass without the synth, and if you just plug it into that jack here. As I mentioned in part 1 of my review of this instrument, is that as I said, MIDI was still something that was still being pretty new, and really was still being developed at the time, and not all manufacturers were coming to the party. Certainly Roland was one of those people that I think wasn't too sure how MIDI would kind of work in terms of talking to other MIDI devices. And so this unit is actually attached by a 24-pin SCSI cable, which is this SCSI cable here, as you can kind of see. And if you haven't sort of seen that before, that's what it sort of looks like, and plugs into it through here. What it does provide is it does provide a means of allowing you to play the bass by itself, or to split the instrument, so you could actually play the bass independently through a bass amp, and then run the floor unit through a PA system or a keyboard amp, and split the two. So that gives you some variation and flexibility to using the unit, and that's one of the good things about it as well. So in terms of the bass by itself, yeah, it sort of lacks something to me. Considering this is made by Ibanez, it's fairly lackluster, and that could be because of the design of the instrument, maybe the lack of mass. I'm just not sure exactly why that is, but certainly if you just base it just on the two conventional pickups that are in here, then to me it just doesn't quite have the sound. If I give you a bit of an idea, if I was to play it sort of in the, I think that's the neck pickup. Certainly there's a bit of punch, but it just, to me, I don't know, it just lacks a little bit of something. Play it on the bridge pickup, same speed. It sort of, to me, it sort of doesn't kind of, yeah, it's not the instrument. If I was just playing bass, I wouldn't use this instrument at all. I would probably use my P bass or something like that. For slapping, it's a bit hard to slap with this instrument, basically because of the way the strings sort of need to be, and I suppose that's partly for the synth as well. And even though you probably see some 80s stuff of people slapping with it, yeah, it's still, and I haven't got the strap on, so I'm sort of fighting it as I'm sort of doing that as well. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of kind of like some sound samples there of the bass by itself. Obviously the better way to play this is blending the two together, so the bass and the synth together. And if I do that again, and you sort of got that at the beginning of the of this part of the review anyway, and I think I've just got a keyboard sound on there. I can't hear that through the laptop while I'm sort of playing, so I'm just hoping that this is working out right. But it's certainly a fatter sound out of it by doing that, and you can certainly get some fat analog sounds out of this unit. And that's one thing you've got to be careful of, is running this through a bass amp together, is that you can find that you will produce so much bass that you can blow your speaker, and I have done that in a Fender BXR rig. Blew a 15 inch speaker, yeah, by just too much bass coming from the synth itself. So it's one thing to just bear in mind. But in normal play, you would find that you wouldn't have a lot of it wouldn't be a big deal as long as you're aware of that. Well, I hope that gives you a better idea of how that looks. Oh, the other thing I'll show you is, and I won't pull out my camera to do that, is that these headstocks, sorry, not headstock, these tuners on the top here are typical Ibanez of the time as well. If you were to look at an Ibanez, they're typical enclosed units that Ibanez would use, although these have got GR stamped on them, obviously for Roland. But yeah, any Ibanez of the time were very similar to that. As again, I hope that gives you a bit of an idea of the unit. It has its pros and its cons. Certainly the shape is very iconic and very identifiable, and is a shape that people, if they're not aware of it, particularly for beginners, look at it and think, wow, it's a really radical kind of design. But in actual play, the functionality of it really is horrible, and there's a real dog to kind of like play without a strap. And normally that's the way you'd need to do it, either with a strap, and probably standing up is the way that you'd normally see yourself using it. Well, hope that gives you a bit of an idea. Thanks for watching. Have a look at part 3. We'll take a look at the floor module, and we'll have a look at some of the issues with that. And if you're a rocket scientist, then you'll probably enjoy that one. Cheers, and I'll see you soon.